Welcome to Unsupervised Learning, Redpoint's AI podcast. I'm Patrick Chase. I'm joined with my co-host, Jacob Efron, and today we had a really interesting conversation with Keith Peiris, the CEO and co-founder of Tome. He spent 7 years at Facebook and Instagram before starting Tome, an AI-native multimodal storytelling company that uses generative image and text models to allow users to create anything from presentations to story outlines and much more. As of March, the company had 3 million users and they had raised over $80 million with their last round of funding valuing the company at a $300 million valuation. We talked about how they took a first principles approach to AI-powered storytelling.
It's going to feel really different if we think through all of that from first principles. And I think that's going to feel way better than bolting a chat bot onto the side of Google Slides or PowerPoint. And we decided that a big idea may be worth the next 10 to 20 years of our lives.
We discuss how Tome designed their conversational UI to best help users.
We often talk about LLMs aren't intelligent enough or they're not coming from the right data. But often the biggest problem is that the customer hasn't given the LLM enough input for it to know what to do, right? So I think it is figuring out this sort of conversational UI that's going to make all of this stuff useful.
And Keith discusses his vision for the future of Tome.
I think Tome in 2035, we would certainly be working on like brain computing rather than a web app. But I think even before that, we just want to be the tool that you pick up to talk about complex ideas.
Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Keith, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jacob. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we always like to start with, would love to hear just kind of the founding story of Tome. Like, how did you guys come to start the company? And can you talk a bit about like the evolution? Obviously, you've lived through a few different hype cycles of generative AI, even in just the 2-3 years that you've been doing the company.
Yeah, for sure. I guess to start off, Henry, my co-founder, and I, we've been working on communication products our entire adult lives. He helped design the latest version of Facebook Messenger, and I worked on a little bit of, humans talking to machines or some NLP research. But I think the most relevant experience I had to Tome was honestly at Instagram, where I was running the AR camera team, the stories camera. When we left Meta, we were talking about how much work we've all done as a society, as technologists, in helping people express themselves through the camera, right? And when you think about what it was like to take a photo in 2005, using like an early digital camera versus what you can do now with like the Snap, TikTok, or Instagram camera. We've taken this thing that used to be sort of laborious and hard. You used to need like a team of cinematographers and like an SGI machine to do anything cool with video. And now you can take hundreds of photos and videos a day with your phone. You can express yourself using AR. You can, drag text on with your fingers, and produce something really sort of powerful and expressive. We were thinking about how, social media drove that innovation. Because, all these social media companies are run, using display ads. So the whole company is incentivized to get people to share as much as possible so that they can put ads in between the feed and make money. But on the other hand, if you want to share something in your head, like an idea or a concept, you don't have this AR multimodal video camera that you can use your fingers. You have to use like Word and PowerPoint and like maybe Twitter. The real problem isn't slide assembly. The real problem is that you're sort of stuck at your desk for hours being like, how do I take all of this information in my head and linearize it so that, my audience will be persuaded? So, we were incubating this and we were starting to look at, GPT-2. And we're like, this thing is not bad. A long way to go. A lot of work to be done. It's a little slow. It's got, all kinds of problems, but the essence of it is actually not bad at helping you, figure out what to say and how to say it. And, I think Henry and I were both like, well, it seems like if we were going to build a product using this technology, we'd have to think about all of it. We'd have to think about like the editor, the interactions, like how the page is constructed, how you would get something out of this like non-deterministic system. And I think it's going to feel really different if we think through all of that from first principles. And I think that's going to feel way better than, bolting a chat bot onto the side of Google Slides or PowerPoint. And we decided that was a big idea, and maybe worth, the next 10 to 20 years of our lives.
I love that. And I'm super interested, like, as you were getting started, I'm sure, you were probably thinking about all sorts of new ways these workflows could work. And I imagine there was some sort of tension between, let's just do something that looks totally different and is nothing like what a user's been exposed to, versus, hey, most of our users are going to be coming from the Adobe Creative Suite, PowerPoint, Google Slides, and like, let's at least help them feel a little familiar or comfortable. Like, how did you think about that in the beginning in terms of how you designed the product?
Yeah, it was a struggle, to be honest, which is to say that, I think if you make it look nothing like a tool that anyone has ever used, I think it's just going to be hard to know what it's good for. But at the same time, like, so much has changed since PowerPoint 1.0. Right? Like PowerPoint 1.0 came from forethought in the 80s before Microsoft picked them up. And this was a format that was designed for 35 millimeter overhead projector slides, right? And because of that, it was, designed for this 4:3 aspect ratio. It was static. The cloud didn't exist. And it wasn't designed to be driven by any sort of models. So as a result, you sort of have infinite X, Y, Z positioning. And it was sort of all designed for direct manipulation. So we were like, well, there's some things about that we have to challenge, which is to say that, most of us don't do work anymore just on a desktop screen. We're like looking at it on mobile. We're looking at it on different, screen properties, like ones that you can touch. All of us, or at least the folks that we were dog fooding with, were working in the cloud. So we wanted to build something that was, live and connected to live data. We knew that it was going to be driven by models. And because of that, I think we wanted to build a sort of predictability into the page, right? If you're going to be driving layouts, if you're going to be driving content being put in, it can't feel like I'm feeling lucky, like it's a different layout every time. So we had to design the page system for it. And we knew that NLP was going to be a sort of core, or natural language was going to be a core way that people sort of interact with Tome. So we wanted to build with language commands in mind. So I'd say that's the technology piece. But then, I think we had a lot of go-to-market considerations, right? Which is to say that it's hard to create a slide go-to-market. I think through some hard work and some amount of luck, we were able to get a little further than many of the slide companies of the past. But it's a really hard go-to-market, because if you try to embrace a consumer go-to-market, right? Most individuals and most small businesses, they don't create enough slides at a high enough frequency for you to spread and grow. So you sort of hit the wall instantly if you're only doing like a founder's pitch deck that they make once a year, right? Or if you are trying to take, a top-down enterprise go-to-market, you'll probably have to build for 4 to 5 years. To build charts, diagrams, compliance, security, control, before your first client will like even use your tool, right? Which is inherently risky in itself, right? So we were like, well, let's pick our poison. Let's take the consumer path. But in order to take the consumer path, we sort of need to embrace non-slide prosumer use cases. So we decided, okay, let's make a page system that we think can stretch to doing mini websites, to do visual docs, to do guides, to do homework, and we'll sort of like grow top of funnel using this like long tail of consumer use cases, and then make sure that once someone likes Tome and they take it into their company, that it's a great slide product too. So that was sort of the go-to-market side. And then maybe the last thing I'll say is, from the competitive perspective, I think we've believed really early on that there's no startup to be built in AI slides, right? If all we were doing was applying AI to slides, then I mean the incumbents will just get around to that faster. So I think because of that, we were always embracing, hey, we have to build our own format.
I personally, I do think I'm feeling lucky for slides would be very cool, but yeah, maybe that's coming later. The question I had for you is, I think one thing that's top of mind kind of for any founder that's building maybe like an AI native SaaS app, for lack of a better term, is, how do users want to interface with AI? How does that show up in the product? Like, any learnings that you can share from how you've designed Tome? I'm sure a ton of thought went into designing it, kind of to work with human and machine. But I guess, what have you learned about the workflows that people want and how they want to interface with AI?
It's a good question. I think as a society, we've evolved a lot. And I think internally we've talked about the first phase of generative AI. Productivity was a little bit like a dancing bear, which is to say that, we were all enamored by this idea that, like, with one prompt, you could create an Oscar-winning movie. You could create a pitch deck that would, send directly to Redpoint, and then your wire would show up the next day. And it was going to do your job so that you could go hang out in the park and live your best life. And I think because of that, we were like all enamored by demoware. We were all enamored by, look at this cool image, look at the scene I created, look at this 8-page presentation that I made. And I think in reality, when we talk to our happiest customers that are in it, that are like using Tome for work, that they're not using AI to try to obviate their entire job. They are using AI to help them shape something they already have, to help them sort of riff when they've got a little bit of writer's block, or to help them start something, when they're like not quite sure how to fit a story into a structure. So I think, we've gone from AI is going to like do your job better than you towards, AI is actually just like a reasonable person who's available 24/7, who can like, iteratively riff with you, to help you get your work and your thoughts to a really good place.
So the iterative riffing, I feel like people that really know how to use these tools, it's unbelievable to watch them like go, right? And obviously, a lot of people, you have so many people that come in and they just get exposed to Tome for the first time. How have you thought about like teaching users or even making the product intuitive for them to get into that like riffing, back and forth with the models that you guys have versus like just staring at the blank page or expecting things to kind of just work on a first prompt?
Yeah, it's a good question. We just released our new version of page generation a couple of weeks ago, and I think this sort of is moving in the direction of being useful at work. So now if you open up Tome, we'll default you to creating a single page instead of a whole presentation. And, we invite you to type anything. You could type dogs if you wanted, or you could type out, you're trying to come up with your pricing strategy for your bottoms up SaaS tool. And, now instead of giving you one answer, we're going to give you 4.
Seen that approach before.
Yeah. We're like, here are 4 different approaches to think about this page. Maybe one is you're talking about sales assist. One is you're thinking about pricing and packaging. One is you're looking at like viral growth. And, from there you could be like more like this or less like this. And we sort of like make it really obvious that these aren't done. You should take one of these and keep going, rather than, here's sort of 9 pages, and hit share when you're done. And, as we're getting into our new version of presentation generation, which is sort of coming out in the next few months, it has a very similar feel. Like we're probably never going to show you like one prompt, 10 pages that happens instantly. We're going to show you the outline, make sure that you sort of agree with the outline. You can edit it if you don't. Then we show you a page, see if you agree with the page, then ask you to regen it, and sort of get into that flow. I talked to someone who was a management consultant for years, and she told me that, even if you work at one of these big management consulting firms, you write out your outline first, and then you go and show, the partner or the case manager, and you get them to approve the outline before you go build out more stuff. We often talk about LLMs aren't intelligent enough, or they're not coming from the right data. But often the biggest problem is that the customer hasn't given the LLM enough input for it to know what to do, right? So I think it is figuring out this sort of conversational UI that's going to make all of this stuff useful.
That makes a lot of sense. And Jacob is the consultant, so he would have.
Yeah, I was getting some PTSD there.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because it makes sense, the iterative creation. But when you're talking about it at the beginning, it's like, hey, Tome can help you come up with this narrative, or you're going to figure that out together and then go figure out the visual side of it. I honestly would have thought it would maybe be less involved at the beginning and more involved at the end. Like, hey, once I have this narrative, then Tome goes and kind of makes it beautiful. But it seems like it's kind of showing up at the beginning all the way through the end. Is that kind of the right way to think about it? I guess depends on how users are using the product.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we try to be flexible, but we found that we can help people the most sort of earlier in the process. And I think our sort of design team's goal has always been, you should be able to show up to Tome with less than what you'd show up to a traditional productivity tool with. You should be able to be like, I think I want to write this sort of product pitch about this idea. I've done the research already, but I'm not quite sure how to land it. And if we can get you to show up to Tome with that feels like a completely different plane of interaction than, sort of the what I would call a last mile productivity tool.
You guys have had just this flood of like inbound. It sounds like people just coming to the website. Everyone, I mean, the presentations people share are super viral. People are really excited about it. And I think a lot of AI founders right now are trying to think about how to channel that like initial excitement and people first getting exposed to the product into like long-term users that stick around. And I'm curious like what you guys have learned about that, and if there's like things that you're like, oh yeah, once someone does that in our product, like we know we've got them, and it's not just like, hey, they tried that and tomorrow they try the next thing that's viral on Twitter.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say we brought in a lot of AI tourists, and I think it was awesome. It sort of helped create explosive top of funnel for us. But I think the challenge with that was that we had to sort through all of the noise, right? Because before we launched Tome, when we were sort of in early access, we were only bringing on, ICPs that we knew would be like great team idea sharers. So we were bringing in startups, tech companies, PMs, sales execs, and they were giving us really detailed feedback of, I tried to hire Tome for this job, and it let me down. Here's what I need. And now we moved to, we've like tipped 10,000 people in a high school in the Philippines, right? And we're suddenly getting feedback of Tome is terrible for me trying to do my homework because it doesn't like cite the sources that the LLM uses. Is that the most important problem for us to go through right now? So
I hope that's actually true, that there's 10,000 people in a high school in the Philippines using this.
That is true. That they hit our workspace limit of 10,000, and one of the enterprise-ready things we need to fix in the coming months. But to be honest, the first thing was that we decided to be a lot more discerning in whose feedback we're prioritizing. So we went sort of back to the personas who we thought were going to get the most out of Tome, and be really permissive of everyone using Tome. We think anyone has a compelling story, or anyone could have a compelling story to tell, but we are really focusing on a couple of personas whom we think can get the most out of Tome. So that's been really helpful. The metric that we use, and it's imperfect like all metrics, but we sort of look for someone wanting to share a Tome with someone other than themselves. And we're like, that's sort of a sign that you've created something good enough for work. And at the start, there was a little bit of noise in this metric too, because it would be like, look, cool, I created an AI presentation. But I think once that stuff subsided, we were starting to be like, well, you just shared this tome with somebody else. What were you trying to do? What were you hoping it would do? And sort of work backwards from there. And that's been really, really good. I think the other thing we found was, to be honest, we weren't that excited about generating self-serve revenue for the sake of it. But we thought it was really good for feedback qualification. We were like, we're going to set a really low price for now because the product isn't done. We're not trying to be a giant self-serve company alone. We're going to charge $8. If you care enough about this product, you could probably pay $8 for us to prioritize your feedback, and that's like really, really helped in figuring out who to focus on and what to do next.
One question I had on the model front, I would imagine there's a ton of that goes into the AI that you guys are using behind the scenes, and there's always this kind of trade-off, like build versus partner. Like, how have you guys thought about kind of curating your own models, or partnering with the model providers, and then also like any shortcomings or learnings from building there?
Yeah, I would say we were very opinionated with wanting to own the customer experience, really understand the problems our customers want to try and solve, and then like get there in a V1 with off-the-shelf models. And I think to sort of be even more opinionated, I think as a technology company with sort of a consumer go-to-market, you either need to be building core technology or you need to have distribution. And I think sort of everyone else gets squeezed out. We decided, hey, we want to be like a distribution company that owns the relationship with customers. So to be honest, we were thinking about it like we're going to build the race car with an engine that we purchase, and then when we're really happy with the aerodynamics and the chassis, and we've got like more data, we'll go build our own engine in the future. So we decided to build sort of V1 of all of Tome using a bunch of off-the-shelf stuff. And then we started to build our own data pipeline. And this was maybe one of the most illuminating things we've ever done. We built our AI team, and we started to get at this pipeline of a couple billion edits a month. It's sort of wild to see. We have all of this data about people taking generation, editing it, throwing it away. Some of it gets shared. But then we also have manual content that's being authored in Tome. And, we started to realize actually the stuff is pretty helpful. And it's all anonymized. I should, state that. But we found that with this data pipeline, we can actually fine tune much smaller open source models and get way better output than some of the sort of large foundation models that are getting a lot of notoriety. And I think this has been awesome for a couple of reasons. One, smaller models work faster. And it turns out when you're building an experience that's supposed to be an extension of someone's mind, the milliseconds matter. And then the other thing is, we're starting to get a little bit sharper with the output, and we're able to sort of do things in a first class way that felt like a hack on some of the traditional models. So for example, we're trying to build a multimodal storytelling tool, and what that means is that sometimes you want a table. Sometimes you want a diagram. Sometimes you want a chart. This is kind of the stuff that we're working on right now. And we can create multimodality by getting the LLM to produce JavaScript to go and fetch that object for us from Tome. And we found that, you can get GPT to do that, but, given that this is sort of a core problem to Tome, we decided to build that part ourselves. And now, because we built, our front end in React, we can get the model to choose a layout, and then we can get then create JavaScript and sort of create a layout using classification that we've built into LLMs. So I would say we're slowly seeping our way down into eventually building our own models.
Super cool. It makes a ton of sense. I mean, obviously you sit on such an interesting set of data, and I think obviously you're able to kind of lower the inference costs, when you build it yourself. But I think the sequencing of doing that after you have the distribution also makes a ton of sense, because you have those like billions of data points on how people are actually using it to build something differentiated. And I'm curious, like you really are, I think just the scale of folks that are using Tome, you're one of probably one of the most prominent examples of really deploying these, large language models and image generation models at scale. I think there's tons of things we hear all the time. Hey, there's tons of things that are cool demos, and then when you try to get them in production at scale, God knows a million things break. I'm curious on your end, like what were some of those things that as you've tried to do this at just a really large scale, that you've had to overcome, or things you've had to build in-house to really be able to do this?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, with a lot of these model companies, and we're close with many of the great ones. They're so early in building an enterprise grade product that they haven't built out capacity monitoring. They certainly aren't working at 5.9 reliability. And there's a bunch of stuff that is like is supported almost by happenstance, but not supported in a first class way. So for example, if your LLM read a large corpus of material and it happened to have read enough Spanish, then it might be fine at generating some kinds of Spanish. But then we would find we move from model to model, and we actually like make our generation quality worse, in Spanish, even though none of us had even thought about it, and the LLM team certainly hadn't thought about it. So I think we've had to build a lot of monitoring and a lot of sort of eval work in order to get things going. We actually rebuilt Tome's architecture with models so we could hot swap a model within a day. Just knowing that, there's so much movement that you don't want to ultimately build in too customized of a way for a single model. So that's been pretty good. We sort of built our own capacity management, which is to say, if we're like moving towards peak, we can slow down the free tier a little bit and prioritize, pro users. And I would say just all kinds of little things like that around really productionizing, building an app with, tens of millions of users that sort of run on foundation models. And then, I think there's all kinds of shortcomings that we've had to learn to overcome, which is to say, I'm sure everyone's talked about LLM hallucination, and we've actually found the best way to combat hallucinations is to actually just build a claim classifier. So we built a claim classifier, and then we send it through a web crawler, and soon we'll be able to replace those claims with things you can find on the web. And one of the first features we rolled out with the claim classifier is this references feature, which is in our text editor. So you can highlight a claim, hit reference, and it'll find a couple of links that you could cite. But we're going to use that to replace the text generation in the future. I think with every image gen model, it sometimes gives you like broken text and broken diagrams and broken charts, and really you don't want any of those things. You want a real chart or a real diagram. So we're getting creative with negative prompting and creating JSON to go and fetch charts and diagrams, coming soon to Tome in the next few months. I would say that the last thing is that we're I think with some of the image gen stuff, I think our customers certainly complain about being in the uncanny valley with faces and hands and all of that. And we're sort of building a way to detect, is there a face in this generation? Does it sort of pass the threshold? If not, should we just use like web image search API instead? So I think we're just getting more and more intelligent in figuring out, what to use generative AI for versus what to use the internet for.
Yeah, I feel like the faces and hands, they always, it's like such a perfect generation, and then their hand is in a really strange spot, or their right and left are mixed up or something. But yeah, there's I can imagine and it's really cool what you guys are doing with the JSON and like actually being able to fetch the item. Yeah, that's super clever. My follow-up question was on the model eval, and it's really interesting. You can kind of hot swap them and are running multiple in parallel. Can you say a little bit more about what the model eval looks like? And then are you guys kind of like, do you have a team internally that evaluates those, or externally, or that's doing kind of labeling and eval? But I think that's something that's really top of mind for founders.
Yeah. So our team in general has a principle of we have to like the stuff that we produce before we ask our users or before we ask an external eval team to rate it. I think one of the few things a startup can export that a big company can't is good taste. I think we always have this bar of like, well, do we like this? And if we don't like this, then we shouldn't even bother. So we started with internal eval, and we were looking at concision, like how concise is the output. Turns out most people want their slides to be concise and terse. They don't want it to sound like sort of flowery AI output. The other thing that we sort of look for is precision and sort of fact correctness, and then we look at, does the story add up? Does page 5 look like it's connected to page 6, and does the whole thing sort of add up? And we found creative ways to evaluate that. I think where we're going from here is we're going to be hiring a small team to do some labeling, but eventually the place we want to get to is where we just have our users tell us if they like generation 1 or generation 2 or generation N, and eventually the place that we can get to is that we're all sort of consumer product engagement nerds. So we were like, we should just monitor time spends, and we should monitor feature retention, and we should be able to sort of run A/B tests at our scale of model 1 versus model 2, and like which one has sort of higher feature retention over 7 days or 30 days, and be able to sort of like move through with that.
You were talking earlier about like about kind of alluding to this kind of like enterprise product. I mean, I believe it was in the context of a high school in the Philippines, which maybe isn't going to be your first enterprise, that you go deep on that with. But I'm curious, like how you've thought about. Obviously, I think the sequencing of the business makes a ton of sense. That you wanted to start, kind of build a product consumers love, and then eventually bring themselves into the enterprise. How do you think about like what that enterprise product needs to look like, and what does that mean for kind of like the Tome roadmap going forward?
For sure. I think one of the things that excites me the most about our enterprise product is that I think we'll be able to sell something really differentiated. And I think the sort of last gen of productivity tools, all they could sell was access control, right? So if all you could sell is access control, then you almost like by necessity need an adversarial go-to-market, right? Where you're trying to get every single person at the company to use the tool. And then you could be like, look, Mr. CIO or Mrs. CIO, look, like 30% of your company uses blank, so you have to pay me. I think that's like a enterprise go to market, but I think we all wish that you could go through the front door and offer something valuable. I think the nice thing with Tome is that we, our enterprise at Tome email is full of people asking for very simple things. One, can I connect the generation to more data sources? Can I feed the generation my Notion, my Google Drive? Can I feed it like a list of terms that my business uses, and then have the generation pull from that? Sort of secondly, could we connect the generation to a single source of truth for facts, like the company dashboard? And if so, like could you pull those facts in and cite it? And then ultimately, the place that we want to get to over the next couple of years is you should be able to sort of pull objects semantically into Tome from a wide variety of cloud services, right? You should be able to say like, make a page about our 30-day retention, and then Tome should recognize that we keep our data in Redshift and we look at it through mode. It should be able to use its like mode sync to go and fetch the data and then render it in a native Tome way, and then sort of have it sync, whenever the author wants to refresh it. But you could imagine going one step above if you're connected to the analytics, if you're connected to like the expense reports, if you're connected to where the roadmap lies, you should be able to automatically create reports. You should be able to sort of build like true like multi-platform cloud reporting that'll all sort of happen through these stories that people need to tell at work anyways. So that's sort of where the enterprise product is going, and I think we feel really lucky that there's a whole lot to do there.
Yeah, the integrations with the other cloud services I think is fascinating, just because I think that's kind of always been something that was challenging with PowerPoint, I guess, is like, hey, yeah, you can screenshot this dashboard and put it in there, but like if you want it to update in real time or tell more of a story around it, then it's not always the best for that. And it was interesting around all this generative AI. There's been this wave of companies doing kind of generative video. And I was thinking about like if you could couple that with a generative presentation that would be dynamically, made on the fly, then you could have, the CEO of a company like walking you through the presentation that was created in Tome, and it would all be personalized. I don't know. It's like kind of a crazy future to think about. Yeah. I don't know if you see like the world heading in that direction, or like what you think about how Tome could interface with like videos or avatars or any of that. But I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned about video when I was at Instagram was that I think whenever you need to make an emotive point, there's just sort of no replacement for video. So it feels a little out of place if you're like, talking through a graph. But I think in the context of pitching, which is what a lot of people use like a slide format for, there's really no replacement for video. So I think there's a wild amount of innovation happening, and I think we're just excited to see where it could go.
And obviously, as you talk about the enterprise product, I feel like a lot is, tying other data sources into, to kind of augment what you can do in Tome. And I'm curious, like, I feel like you could take two, schools of thought around that. Like, one is you could go in and do some of the dirty work of actually getting some of that data into Tome yourself, or you could say, hey, that's not really what we do. Like, there'll be other sets of folks that eventually the plumbing will get better here. And like, there's all sorts of companies that are working on feeding this data eventually into models. Like, we'll kind of stay back from that. Like, how do you think about where, like, how in the blood and guts of these enterprises you want to get?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the challenges of being so early in this journey with AI is that it's hard to know what we should build, what we should wait on, and what we should ignore, because it'll sort of be obvious in the coming months and years. And I think to your points, I think someone is going to figure out this data syncing layer with LLMs, and we'd love to buy the solution from them. So we're really focused on right now the sort of data syncing into Tome through the enterprise, and the sort of core product of charts, diagrams, multimodal output, really building robustness there, because that's ultimately the stuff that differentiates our company. And we know there are many a startup figuring out enterprise data injection into LLMs, and I know that we've all talked about like hacking the context window. We've talked about embeddings. We've talked about small, finely tuned models, and we're sort of excited for someone else to take the lead on that stuff.
I mean, another topic I know folks will be eager to get your thoughts on is like pricing. I mean, I think everyone's trying to figure out, given inference costs that are incurred with different user actions, like, how do you think about tying pricing to that? And I'm sure, I mean, it's, obviously you guys are still figuring exactly that out on your end, but curious, like, how you've thought about that. And, maybe different approaches that you guys have thought about.
Yeah. I've been told by many great CEOs that I'm going to be working on pricing and packaging until the day I die. So it's hard to say that we figured it out.
Jacob's a consultant, so he has to ask about pricing. It's like it's in his DNA.
When you leave a consulting firm, it's contractually obligated. If you ever host a podcast, you have to ask about it. So
that's my second consulting joke about Jacob working on. I'm going to see if I can hit 3 by the end. We'll see.
I believe in you.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I think to be honest, we had a very market-centric approach to start, which is that Hey, let's be honest. We love the product we're building. We know it's early. And because of that, we'd love to have as many paid subscribers as possible using the product. And we know if they love it and they ask for more, we can build more SKUs later. And because of that, we decided to start, I think as low as we possibly could. And sort of be open and permissive. The other thing I've found about all of these compute costs is that there's a bunch of downward pressure on them from a couple of factors. One, by the time you get to Tome scale, you no longer buy inferences per token or action. You just buy GPUs, right? And at that point, all you're interested in are peak capacity and sort of air traffic control at times of peak. So I think that actually puts a bunch of downward pressure on your costs. The other thing that's happening is that the models are becoming smaller and more efficient, right? I can't imagine a world where we're running Tome in thousands of enterprises using off-the-shelf GPT-4 or 5 or whatever it is, right? It doesn't seem sort of plausible. So I imagine we're going to be using smaller models over time that'll be cheaper to run and more efficient. And then the last piece is it sort of seems like energy is going to get cheaper, GPUs are going to get cheaper. So I think over like a long enough timeline, I think that this is going to look a little bit more like, your regular cloud storage costs rather than it being this big expensive thing, which is why, I think we've had this perspective of, we should make sure that our gross margins look fine, but this isn't sort of the time to sort of like maximize profit when we're this early into the company's life cycle.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's been interesting to see just how much that cost has come down over time for both training. I think the training was down maybe 10x in a year, and then inference also down 10x in a year. And you can imagine as that curve continues and there's kind of increasing pressure on the model providers that that trend will continue. Moving towards the last few questions here, would love to know, I think you guys have an incredible vision for kind of Tome and, a massive undertaking that you have gone on. Like, where do you want Tome to be in maybe 5 to 10 years, or where do you see the company and kind of that longer time horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I would want Tome to be a multi-format company. Which is to say that, our sort of grand vision of Tome is that we're reducing the number of steps between you conceiving an idea, manifesting it in digital canvas, and having your audience understand it and be persuaded. All right. And I think, Tome in 2035, we would certainly be working on like brain computing, rather than a web app. But I think, even before that, we just want to be, the tool that you pick up to talk about complex ideas. And, I think that means that we sort of have clear usage inside of an enterprise for pitching your CEO on your next big idea, or like, pitching your PM on the next sub feature that you want to build. But I would hope that, we sort of maintain cultural relevance, which is to say that I would love to see climate activists using Tome to talk about big ideas and share them on Twitter, or like energy discussions happening in Tome. And I think that that's sort of been the grand vision and also the challenge in communicating Tome early on, which is to say that, when you start a company, everyone tells you to go vertical SaaS, right? Pick like one persona, pick one use case, and then land and expand. But in reality, everyone needs. So a lot of people need to tell a compelling story, and all of those people need text, they need video, they need charts, they need diagrams. And I think it's certainly a feature, not a bug, that Tome has this sort of horizontal, broad appeal. And I wouldn't want us to sort of lose sight of the prosumer business as we figure out enterprise.
Well, we always like to end our interviews with a quick fire round where we ask you a few questions and get your quick thoughts. And so maybe I'll kind of kick it off. What's your favorite thing that someone's built with Tome?
It's a good question. I would say I've seen a couple. Someone published a children's book after generating it in Tome and then printing it out, and it's now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And then they have two. So the other one was that we found this tiny agency in LA who like pitched Angelina Jolie to work with them using Tome, and they sent her a Tome, and she opened it on her phone, and she decided to work with them. So I think those are maybe my two favorites, instead of me talking about some startup raising a Series A or B, which has happened a few times.
That's amazing. I guess next fire round question. What's something that's overhyped in AI today, and what's something that's underhyped?
I think one-shot generation is overhyped. Whether you're working in video, multimodal, text, I think that we've just overhyped that you type something into a prompt and you get an end result. I think it was like an easy media narrative, but I don't think we're going to work that way in the end. I think what is underhyped is, AI is a tool for human amplification. It's just you, but better. It just helps you get to a better result faster. And I think we need to talk more about that and celebrate those kinds of companies a little more.
What's your favorite AI product outside of Tome?
It's a good question. I'm actually a big fan of Perplexity. They're starting to break my habits of going to Google to ask hard questions. And I think it sort of shows the power of what an LLM can do.
Yeah, Perplexity is super impressive.
Yeah, we both enjoy using it too. Well, I feel like there's a ton of threads that people are going to want to pull on here. So we'll leave it to you to say, where can people go to learn more about you, Tome, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I would say if you're interested at all, try Tome, go to tome.app. You can try it out for free. And I'd love to hear what you're using it for. So you can find me on Twitter. I guess X, sorry. And send me a DM. Would love to chat.
Last thing, you were talking about this vision where, vision for AI kind of maybe in the beginning before people had played with it, where, you click a button, it generates a tome or it generates a presentation that gets sent to Redpoint, and then they automatically fund it. We only wire the money if it is a tome.
We do 6 hours of diligence at least if it's not a tome. But if it's a tome, we just wire immediately.
Yeah, if it's a PDF or a PowerPoint, then it's extensive diligence. Otherwise, then it's AI native, and then we're all in.
Thank you, guys.
That's new firm official
You're
policy.
the best advocates.